Alright, I'm Matt Jones and I'm making an immersive RPG in Godot. And this is a follow-up video to the one I posted last time about the call throttled. So you should watch that before you watch this. First, let me get a plug-in here. You can find out all the information at immersiverepg.com. There's a Patreon if you want to support, patreon.com/immersiverepg. And let's get started. So I've been working more on the call throttled. I extracted everything into a plugin, so now you can add the plugin to your project and it'll work like a plugin should. What else did I do? Oh, I got rid of the main loop, the custom main loop. Before you would have to do project settings, general, run, and set your main loop type to a custom scene tree. But I got rid of all that because that's way too complicated and you shouldn't need to do that to have a plugin. Let me show you the example running. Can remove balls, add 500 balls throttled, and down here it's going to print. I have the logging turned on so it'll print information. I changed to using microseconds instead of milliseconds, so now we have 1,000 times more precision. So for example, the budget is what we have at 16 milliseconds or 16,000 whatever microseconds. The overhead is the amount of time the engine used, so that's for like physics and navigation and all that stuff that runs in the engine before we get to run. And then the expenditure, that is the amount of time we used for this one frame, and the surplus is what's left over, and then the called is a number of throttled calls that were called, and waiting is the amount left over. So then you can see that this one it broke all of the jobs down into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It broke it down and ran them over 7 frames instead of running them all at once. So as you can see, you can remove them all. You can add 500 more at a time every time I click this, and it's not really going to drop frames. There's still a little bit more work I can do. I'll go into that later, but it's very smooth now, much nicer. What else? Oh, I added a bunch of callbacks, or what are they called here? Signals. So now you can have a signal for checking the number of calls that are waiting. So if you do call throttle 1,000 times, you're going to have a whole bunch of those waiting. So this will let you know how many have been waiting. So it'll be like 1,000, and then maybe it'll be 700 the next iteration, and then 300, and so you can keep track. And then there's also a signal for if the engine is either busy or not too busy, because then we run into the problem. So for example, if I set this up so it doesn't delete any extra balls when I run it, and if I just keep clicking this over and over, it's going to get to a point where there's way too many balls. So now it's going to want to spawn 7,000 and something, so that's going to continue to go over budget. So what we're doing is deleting the extra ones, so now it can we can use these callbacks to see when we're over budget and delete that. So we get to a point where the engine is so busy that every single frame, see, look at the frame rate drop, every single frame it's busy doing the physics for all these balls, so it doesn't have time to run any more of the throttled calls. So if you remove all the stress from the engine by deleting them, then it will start running them again. So that's why we have not busy and too busy. So too busy will get called when it starts being too busy, and not busy will be called when it's no longer busy. So normally what you do is you just free a bunch of crap in your game. Like for example, if you have broken debris on the ground, or if you're making a first-person shooter, you have bullet casings or dead bodies or blood pools. You could just free up those when the engine's too busy. And then that's what these two are for. And I also have overframe budget. This is for if a single frame goes over the amount of budget, which would be 16 milliseconds or whatever you usually have. So here I'm just arbitrarily going through and deleting a hundred spheres. Obviously, this would depend on the type of game you're doing and whatnot. It's going to be completely dependent on the game. Um, what else is there to show you? Oh, I changed the name to Godot call throttled. So now the code is at github.com/immersiverpg/Godot call throttled. So if you want to see the code there, I think it will redirect. If you use the other one, it'll go back to this. And the name is changed, so now when you want to call it, it's Godot call throttled. It's kind of verbose. I need to work on a few things, and maybe I'll change it, but who knows? But that's what it's called now. Oh, in the other video, I watched it again, and I sounded a bit too enthusiastic about replacing call deferred with call throttled. Obviously, you're still going to want to use call deferred for some things. It's still very useful. In call throttled is it's similar, but it's different. You're obviously not going to replace one with the other. And I've been doing a lot more research into how the Godot main loop works and how the engine itself works. Let me see here. I actually mapped out this is a very simple tree that describes how the main loop works. So when every single iteration, it'll first run all of your input events like keys and mouse clicking buttons and whatnots, and then it steps in the main iteration, and then it gets the ticks for the CPU, and then it steps into the physics and does the physics stuff. It runs the 2D physics engine, 3D physics engine, and then it steps into your scene tree and runs physics process. And it does this for every single iteration of the physics. It could do this like I think up to 8 times per frame, and then it'll emit the signal physics frame, so you can do like await whatever for get tree physics frame. It calls those there, and then it runs all of your nodes physics process, and then it does the message system, which is where all of your call deferred will be running. So all your call deferreds could be running inside of there, so that would be very useful, and you wouldn't want your call throttle to be the same thing. So this is still really useful. And then it does timers, and then tweens, and then the nav mesh navigation stuff, and then it does call deferred again, and then it runs all your process events, and it's basically the same thing. Like here's physics, and then here is process. It does basically the same thing for your physics process functions, and then your process functions. So it's emitting the signal, then it does all your call deferred, and then it runs all the nodes process functions, and then it does checks for more call deferred again, then your timers, and then your tweens, and then more call deferred, and then it does all the drawing, and then it increments the frame to the next frame. Then it goes back and does it all over again. And the VSync happens down here depending on if you have it on, or it'll just sleep for a while. So I learned a lot about that. That's really interesting, the way call deferred works. Really, really useful. But one interesting thing is when I'm running my code, where is it? Call throttle, main iteration. Yeah, so basically we're sticking a node in the scene tree at the very start and the very end. And I noticed on the previous video, who was it? Someone mentioned that it was SA7-ish, whatever. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your handle, but you mentioned this, and I was talking about moving everything to the end of the frame. Because yeah, that's right. You were good to point that out. If we do everything at the start of the frame, we still have things like your nodes and physics to run, and we could be running over budget. So like I mentioned here, we moved everything to the end of the frame, so that's how it works now. But the problem is at the start, when you want to get the CPU ticks, you normally do timer get ticks, And then the problem is this code itself is running in our main loop. Let's see, somewhere about here. So before it does that, it's going to run our input. It's going to do a little overhead. It's going to run the physics engine for 2D and 3D and a bunch of other things. So, and emit the signal. So by the time we get down to here, when we actually call get ticks, this is going to be way different from if we checked it way up here at the start of the loop. So there's going to be a few milliseconds off. So then we end up drifting off. So one of the things I've been thinking of doing is going into Godot itself and changing so we get access to this information. So I went in and I changed it so now we have engine get frame ticks. This normally isn't accessible. I went into the Godot source code and made it so it's so we can access that from GD script and recompiled everything. So I'm going to see if I can get that exposed to GD script so we can access that and get our exact ticks at the start of the frame. Let me show you the actual Godot source code. Here's essentially what the main loop does. Every single frame it'll do this. See, this is just getting the next the ticks, setting the frame. We get our physics engine, get our time scale. We sync the timers. We do some more setup. We're getting the number of physics steps we're going to take because it gets broken up on up to I think 8 steps. Then we run the XR stuff for if you're doing VR or AR, and then if you're on mobile, it'll actually pull the or it'll run the input again. But if you're on desktop or whatnot, it usually doesn't do this. And then we actually get the ticks here, and then we 3D physics, 2D physics, and then the actual code is running here. So all of this has to run before we would be running this right here. So it's going to be off, and it doesn't seem like much, but if that happens every single frame, we're wasting a lot of cycles. So that's gonna be something I'm gonna look into. What else? I think that's pretty much it. If you guys want to try, I wanted to try this out and get it into a plugin so you guys could test it out. So go to github.com/immersiverpg/Godot callthrottled. Stick the plugin in your project and start testing it out. Some of the stuff I know it's still a bit confusing. Especially the naming for some of the signals. I wasn't quite sure what to call some of these things, so I'm going to continue to refine this and work on a few things. But I wanted to get this out there to see if you guys could test it out and get me some feedback. So anyway, I'll put the YouTube video up, and leave me some comments if you have any questions or anything. Let me know, because I'm going to continue to work on this. Anyway, again, if you want to see everything, it's at immersiverpg.com. There's a Patreon, patreon.com/immersiverpg, and I will see you guys later.